let's get on to subject which I know is dear to your heart at the moment, and that is your book, the post-pandemic book. Can you tell us about that? Are you allowed to tell us about that? Because I know it's coming out.
Absolutely. It comes out on June 1st, so we're ready to talk about it. At the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was sort of wondering, when it sort of started to spread beyond China, it was impacting everyone. Most of our business in February was speaking in Asia, so that all disappeared. We went through an adjustment period, and by the beginning of March, we started to kind of get a sense that we thought we're not going anywhere for 12 to 18 months. You know, it's just going to be really difficult until people have antibody tests or vaccinations. I would be very reluctant to go in large communities. And we already published books, but we just had a chat internally about, well, what could we do here? There's so many different views about what could happen after this pandemic. So rather than trying to pick one view, we said, well, let's do a multi-author book. And March the 20th, we put a call for papers out to a bunch of our friends and to people we didn't know, just via social media. We were hoping for 40, maybe 50 submissions at best, and that we'd end up with 20 good chapters out of that. As it happens, we got 115 submissions. And we got enough really, really, really good content to create 2 books. So we have one coming out on the 1st of June, and then one that's more specific to the future of particular countries and industries and themes like retirement and education, and that will come out in September. So this first book is 28 chapters. It's 25 authors from around the world exploring 4 things. So what are some of the big shifts and scenarios that could evolve from where we are, or that we're seeing the roots of? Secondly, what happens around society and social policy? The third is looking at the future of government and the economy. And the 4th section looks at the future of business and technology. And so you've got some incredible ideas in there, from scenarios of a very optimistic future to scenarios of, what happens if we declare a victory too early over the pandemic? How could that be? People talking about what are the upsides that come out of the changes? How might some of our behaviors change for the better and our ways of being and connecting? What are some of those things that were trends or visible ideas in society that have got accelerated by the pandemic, where the pandemic has effectively created a laboratory for the future? So lots of really interesting ideas. And to kick the book off, we created 4 scenarios. And the way you do scenario planning, or the way most people do scenario planning, is they create a matrix. They identify the 2 most important forces that are most uncertain, but that could have the biggest impact. And for us, those 2 were, the evolution of the pandemic, which could, at one end of the spectrum, be that it just never gets eradicated, it's here forever, or it's here long term. And the other end of the spectrum is it's totally eradicated. And then on the economy, we had at one end of the spectrum a deep and long recession. And at the other end, we had, a rapid bounce back. So we got the spectrum. We didn't have the further extreme. So we didn't talk about the kind of Armageddon scenario where it all turns to dust. Nor did we have the hockey stick bounce back that some people are talking about, where their economy collapses 30% in Q2 and it's regained it all by Q3. We didn't go for those things. But so that gives you 4 scenarios and really interesting possibilities. If you like, the worst case scenario in our model is what we call the long goodbye, where you have a poorly contained pandemic and a deep recession. That's where we all have to learn. That's the one we all have to learn to address, because none of us like looking or planning for that. And when we do presentations about this at the moment, what you find is that less than 5% of people are doing any planning for that scenario. There's a second scenario then, which we're talking, which we call safe but hungry, where we favor dealing with the pandemic and eradicating it over the economy. So we have lots of lockdowns and we deal with it. We help the developing world really get to grips with it. A long and much slower economic recession for us to get out of, but we come out more sustainable and solid on the other side. The third scenario we call the VIP economy. That's where we don't control the pandemic, but the economy really takes off again. And this is what we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
And there, the wealthy do well. We see that as a scenario where governments favour the wealth creators, the people working in the wealth creation businesses, the investors in those businesses. They get first access to testing and vaccination. And what you effectively see is a form of social distancing that just keeps them away from the poorer people, the people who are more likely to catch it. And some countries are already doing that. You're seeing them cordoning off areas of the poor and just not letting them out.
Yeah.
And so you could see that, and that's an investor's dream, that scenario, because a lot of people will keep working, money will be being created, but a lot of businesses fail. And there'll be the money for bargain hunters to go in and purchase assets for a fraction of their true value. And often in recessions, you see some of the biggest businesses of the future being born. And then the fourth scenario we call inclusive abundance. And that's the one where you get control of the pandemic and you get a good rebound of the economy. And we're really investing in the future. So when people are given bailout money by governments, it's tied to innovation investments by those businesses. It's tied to making sure that you're focusing on the green economy. In that scenario, there's more of an investment in the future economy,
yep,
in the sectors of the future, in skills, in building capacity, in tackling the sustainable development goals. It's not all rosy and sunlit. There's still a lot of the problems we have today, but we're on a much better footing. So that's the one where people want to be. The one I would say that most people think, the majority tend to think is most likely, is the one we call the VIP economy,
yeah,
where the pandemic continues, but we take the brakes off the lockdowns and we just try and drive the economy, and we accept the human cost is a human cost.
yeah, yeah.